If you're just creating basic titles, the built-in Premiere Title tool can usually do the trick. But if you want to leverage the tremendous power of Photoshop, it couldn't be easier to go between Premiere and Photoshop in the title creation process. This is just another example of your ability to share tasks among the different applications within the Creative Suite, as we've already looked at the integration within Adobe Audition, Adobe After Effects, and Adobe SpeedGrade. So now let's take a look at Adobe Photoshop integration. Now, you might think that you start in Photoshop, which you absolutely can. However, you can also start in Premiere, and the reason that you might choose to do this is so that Premiere can set the dimensions, the frame rate, and the pixel aspect ratio for you. So I'd like to show you that method now. So I'm just going to come up to File, and New, and Photoshop File, and here are my settings. I'm going to say OK, and I'll name this Letterpress Lower Third. And I'm going to put it in the Course Created Assets folder. And then notice this checkbox here, Add to Project, Merged Layers. Earlier in the course, we talked about how to access the individual layers of Photoshop documents. And if you want to do that, it's a slightly different workflow, which I'll show you in a little bit. But for right now, I'll click Save. And here we are in Photoshop, and I have a blank slate here. And notice I do have my Safe Action and Safe Title lines, and this is really helpful when you're creating title for video. All right, so I'm going to create a basic lower third for Kelly, nothing too fancy. I'm going to start here with my text tool and just type her name and designer. And let's make that a little bit smaller. Okay, and we want to change the font. We'll go Bank Gothic. And I'm going to create a shape behind her as well, kind of like we did before, like so. And I'm going to turn that into a gradient. And let's find that same kind of amber color that we used previously. I'll say OK there. And let's change the opacity of that to 40-some%. And we'll go to the other side, and this is going to be the white on top. And let's go ahead and change the opacity of that down to maybe 15 or so. And let's send that layer to the back, like so. And I'm going to just come into blending options on Kelly's layer and just give it a basic drop shadow. We'll bring the distance back just a little bit and the opacity up. And I'll say OK. Now, all I'm going to do is save this, Command-S or Control-S on a PC, and I'll head back over to Premiere. And there's my title. I'm going to drop it in my 13.4 bin. And we want that over Kelly, so I'm going to zoom in, ++, and drop the title over her video. Now let's say I want to change it. Well, Photoshop is technically still open because I didn't close it, but if it was closed, all you would have to do is just click on the title, right-click, and say Edit Original, and then Photoshop would open. So let's change this a little bit. I'm going to grab my text and open up my character window. And let's bring those two lines a little bit closer together. And we'll bring this down. And let's grab our rectangle, come up here to fill, and make this a little bit darker. So we'll go ahead and darken that up a little bit and bring our opacity up a little bit. And again, I'll save, Command-S, head back over to Premiere, and the change is made. Now, other things about Photoshop files. Again, they're just like any other file in Premiere. So if I click on it and then go to Effect Controls, I still have all of my motion effects available to me, and I can throw any of my other effects on. So I still have my Alpha Glow. I can pop that on. I can animate some movement. I can put on other effects, anything I want. And then finally, one last thing about Photoshop files, and we did learn this in a previous movie, but you can bring in individual layers and then animate each of those layers. Right now, this is a merged file here, but if I wanted to bring in individual layers, I would just need to import it separately. So I'm going to click on my bin here and then right-click and import, and then I'm going to go to that Photoshop file that I created, and I'll just say import. And then when this comes up, I can either choose individual layers or I like to choose sequence. And OK. And here's my folder here with all of the individual layers plus my sequence in here. So then I could access each of those layers separately. If you want to learn how to animate the different layers, you can watch the Working with Layered Photoshop documents in Adobe Premiere and Adobe Photoshop movie that I did earlier in this course. So we've really only scratched the surface of what the integration of Premiere and Photoshop can be, but at least now you have enough context to start experimenting with this really cool workflow.